Can Cities Overcome Capitalism? And this is a provocative title that is exclusive to this presentation, because sometimes when we are writing academic articles and essays, we need sometimes to be less provocative. But when we are speaking with people face-to-face or online, we have a little bit more freedom to ask questions. So I decided to be a little bit more provocative with this one. And basically the center thing of our article is to discuss how solidarity economy principles could also complement the idea of a circular economy in a city context. And if you want to interrupt me, it's totally fine. This doesn't have to be a monologue. If you want to ask questions or comments, you can unmute yourself and just say right away, because I don't mind. I'm Brazilian and I'm fine with interruptions, and I don't like it. So if you have any comments or things that come up to your mind, feel free to share them. So basically, the idea of this research and of this book chapter was that circular economy is usually very dominated by a technological perspective and by this type of kind of technical thinking. And also in the literature, it was quite frequent that many authors, they would point out that there was a need to think more deeply about this social approach of circular economy. And one of them even mentioned that it could make it more sustainable in the long term. And basically, I come from Latin America, so solidarity economy is very strong there. For example, my mom, she does a bunch of solidarity economy initiatives as well. And I was thinking, this is totally social-based economy. The understanding of the economy is very rooted in societal needs. And similarly, like my mom, she did the solidarity projects. Many of them also involved circular concepts. So that's when I thought maybe there could be some complementarity there, or somehow they could be put together and we could see where this would go. And this was very well received by my colleagues who co-authored the article, or the book chapter rather. And that's when we decided to do to understand if it would be possible to complement these gaps in societal gaps in circular economy. Basically, I brought a very basic conceptualization of the circular economy and of the solidarity social economy, just to give an idea for you if you don't have, if you don't know anything about this concept. Circular economy in Finland is quite popular already. So most of us, we have this basic understanding, but solidarity social economy is not. So the circular economy is a system, economic system, that replaces what it's called the linear system of producing and just dumping and creating waste, but rather it improves the material flow in the economic systems through reducing, recycling, recovering materials. This is, of course, a very simplistic definition. It can also include, for example, using more efficient ways of energy. So not only these kind of like ways of putting the material loops in a circular way, but could also include more efficiency in how we use materials as well. But the solidarity and social economy comprehends a series of practices, but also as a social movement that offers alternatives to the current capitalistic system. And with this, you already can see a big difference between them, because in one of them, it's very focused on how we use energy and matter in our society, and the other one is more like we want to offer alternatives to the current capitalistic system. So we want, it's an anti-capitalist movement, and it's based on cooperative systems and on democracy, and so it has very somehow different narratives. And why did we decide to focus on cities in our study? So the population, the global population, lives in urban areas, most of it, and it's increasing. And many of the social and environmental problems that we experience around the world, they originate in cities, and they happen also on urban territories. So we thought that this could be a nice locus for seeing these economies happening in practice. This was our research question. So to understand exactly how the ideas of social solidarity economy could enrich the social sustainability in urban circular economy. Research questions are always a bit funny because they involve so many, so many concepts, and somehow, I don't know, it's funny. But well, this is the part that my colleague Erkki-Jussi was very good at, which was to understand the ideas of economy and how we talk about them. So basically, how we organize our economies and the narratives and the concepts that we use, they matter. And currently, capitalism is the prevailing way that we organize these economies. Capitalism has achieved many things in terms of production. For example, we are able to produce in mass scale so many things. This is a bit random, but I'm very passionate about the aviation industry. It's a very recent interest of mine, and the aviation industry is one example of the types of things we can do in a globalized and capitalistic society, which doesn't mean that we don't have so many problems, also caused by the way that modern economies are organized. For example, poverty and territorial inequality. Just before this presentation started, I was discussing and chatting with Victor, who is organizing this session today, and who is the editor of this book, about how where he lived and I live in Tampere, the urban development is completely crazy. And we were just chatting about how it's so difficult, for example, to buy a house or a flat near the city center where you wouldn't need a car, and how there are all the time this kind of gentrification problems. We didn't talk specifically about gentrification, but this is something that I was thinking about. And this is one consequence of this capitalistic way of organizing the economies. And of course, since there are problems, there are also many concepts and ideas and solutions on how we can fix these problems. And these concepts, they're many times policy concepts. So for example, one of them is sustainable development. It's a very famous one, and it's quite spread everywhere. It's one of the ways that we try to think, and we try to make it operational, how we can fix the issues caused by capitalism. And circular economy, it's another one, and so is social solidarity economy. And then what we tried to understand in our paper was the macro differences of both circular economy and social solidarity economy. There is a mistake there. It's just SE, but it should be SSE, by the way. Just, yeah. So we try to understand. This is a very overwhelming table. I wanted to make it more simple and not so, because I think it's not a good thing when you have slides with so much text and with a table like this, but I will just explain why I put it there. It's just so you can understand some of the aspects that differ in these approaches. And in here, what we did is that we, besides comparing circular economy to social solidarity economy, we wanted to compare to green capitalism, just to understand what would be the approximations and the contradictions to this paradigm as well of thought and of research. And this was basically done with a literature review. So we reviewed the literature of these three kind of like ideas of alternative economies. And I had already mentioned at the beginning that one important difference between circular economy and social solidarity economy is that social solidarity economy is in essence very much anti-capitalistic, and it's in essence very much bottom-up type of movement. While circular economy doesn't, is not usually framed or is not usually dealt with in policy as an anti-capitalist type of economy. And there are many differences. For example, so this is one very important thing in the worldview of this economy, of these ideas of economies, but there is also another important aspect that it's, of course, the role of citizens. So what is the role of citizens in these economies? So for green capitalism, citizens are mainly consumers. For circular economy, they are consumers, but they are also producers, and they are also service providers and owners. So there is a difference. But for the social solidarity economy, it's a worker movement mainly. So citizens are very much associated with workers and with worker rights movement. So it's a big difference there. And of course, the type of policy making is also very different, and the types of problems that we want to solve with this. So when we think about the problems that I was just narrating for you that capitalism generates, so for example, territorial inequality, poverty, environmental degradation, this is also a way of seeing the way that we see these problems can be different depending on the type of alternative economy that we are discussing. So for example, for green capitalism, the problem is the growth that doesn't respect the planet's boundaries, but the idea of growth is not much discussed. But for social solidarity economy, the growth is the problem itself. So the profit over people, the loss of biodiversity, climate change, inequality, it's a problem. While for circular economy, the problem would be the linear material and energy flows, and the fact that economic growth necessarily, it's very materialized somehow. So these are different ways of seeing the problems that are caused by the current way that we organize our modern economies. And of course, the actors that are pushing these movements or that are pushing these economies are very different. So I was mentioning at first about my mom doing her solidarity economy initiatives, and this is basically a movement at the very grassroots levels. While what we found in the literature is that green capitalism is usually more led by international institutions like the World Bank, and that it tends towards this more technologically mediated globalization, while for circular economy, it's customers, it has this different levels. So it can also be the industry and cities and national level, while for social solidarity economy in the literature is usually seen as a very grassroots type of movement. So self-managed entrepreneurs and worker movements and anti-capitalist movements and so on. And finally, I promise this wouldn't be overwhelming, but somehow I feel it is this table. But finally, we go to the policy instruments, and of course they differ because in green capitalism, it's market-based mechanisms. So this is not a big surprise, but this would be, for example, carbon trading. So I want to emit in one side of the world, so I buy the right of emitting from power plant that is powered under green energy. So this would be the classic market-based mechanism. And while circular economy would have this very classic promotion of eco-industrial symbiosis, so one's waste is another one's treasure, basically, but at the industrial level. Taxation would be also a policy instrument of circular economy, fiscal incentives, innovation vouchers, and so on, which could also be seen in green capitalism, although it's not there. And finally, social solidarity economy has a very strong appeal towards distribution, shared decision-making, for example, social and community currencies. It's also a different type of thing that appears there that is very remarkable in social solidarity economy movements, social ownership of land, community consumption, microcredit, this decentralization of the environmental, and not only environmental, but also cultural goods. And this basically means changing everything, how we organize our economy. But now we go to the case examples, because this was not only a literature review. So I mentioned to you, I told this little story about how we came up to think that solidarity economy could be a nice addition to circular economy. And it happened that we had done a case catalog of cases of circular economy in Latin America. And what we noticed is that there was a case that was very interesting because it was a strategy for resilience in Montevideo in Uruguay that aimed at building an economy that was circular and also solidary, which is very interesting and exactly what we were looking for. And also we noticed that circular economy is very mainstream in Europe, and in Latin America, solidarity economy is stronger. So we thought it could be nice to have this case from Latin America. Also in Spain, solidarity economy is very strong. And I'm going to bring here the cases that we use. So we have first here Doranta, which is a district. And it's important just to see here that the way that we collected data for these three cases was very different, because in Montevideo and Madrid, we were analyzing policy papers. And in here, Doranta, that was actual field work with artists, and it was a primary data collection in that sense of like face-to-face type of thing. So of course, the data is different, but still it allowed us to have some sort of interesting experiment and exploration of what this economies would look in practice in different cities and in different policy levels. But here, Doranta is a district in Tampere. I was just mentioning to you that urban development in Tampere is kind of crazy. And this district, it used to be an industrial district. Tampere is a city that nowadays is not an industrial city, but it used to be in the past. And these industries, they are no longer active, but the area is quite nice because it's near the city center. There is not really a lot of space to expand the city anymore. So it could be kind of like a convenient place. And there, what was noticed is that there were many experiments going on with business innovations and citizens activities related to circular economy. And there were many spontaneous citizen-led initiatives as well that reassembled some sort of social and solidarity economy type of thing. And I already mentioned that the Montevideo strategy of resilience had the goal of transitioning the economy towards a social and solidarity and circular economy. They already had a national policy on circular economy, and this was not the focus. It was more directed towards the city. And the main idea is that they wanted with the strategy to help the city and the citizens to deal with future challenges and risks, climate change, territorial inequality, and so on. And what we noticed, and I'm going to explain a little bit better, is that the idea of solidarity there is kind of very watered down. So when I told you about all of these social solidarity economy mechanisms, for example, shared ownership of land, shared ownership of businesses, direct democracy, all of this, you don't really see it happening in this strategy, at least at the policy level of the strategy, how it is written. And finally, we have Madrid, which is a super interesting case because this strategy for solidarity was the center of the economic planning of Madrid. So until 2025, so solidarity economy was chosen as the idea of economy that it's gonna direct the economic planning of the city. And one of the main things that they aim to solve is the territorial inequality, which is also something that they try in Montevideo, and to maybe invest in the recovery and reuse of buildings. And this is also where we see a bit of circularity principles. And they have different ideas of growth, which is also very interesting, not necessarily related to profit. So they also measure growth, but in a way of how the solidarity, social solidarity economy are expanding in the territory, and not in the way of how much are we growing our profits, for example, with these initiatives. So these were very interesting and different cases. And what we noticed is that social sustainability emerged when we had certain conditions. So for example, in Doranta, it was not necessarily a goal of the activists and of the entrepreneurs to promote social solidarity economy, but still these principles, they were realized there. And this happened because of somehow a vision, and of course, because of the skillful promoters that kind of opened this window. And that what we also noticed is that social solidarity economy can contribute to circular economy and urban sustainability in major aspects. For example, employment, democracy, because in the strategy for Madrid, something very interesting that appears, I'm going to talk a little bit more very soon, is that social solidarity economy is a way of generating decent employment, and is a way of addressing this employment barrier, so that we are not just measuring how good an economy is just by any types of jobs that it creates, but by jobs that are very meaningful, by jobs where workers, they get to participate, by jobs where they are preferably also green jobs. So this was very interesting. Social solidarity economy ideas also included some important remarks on cultural heritage, education, and resilience, and democracy, and so on. So I'm gonna explain maybe a little bit more exactly what the social solidarity economy could add to the circular economy. So for the first thing is that SSE sees the economy as a social process. So many times, I remember now my first and only course of economy that I had in my Bachelor of Social Sciences. And for me, it felt really funny how the teacher saw the economy as almost like an abstract thing, that it's inevitable and that it's kind of like changing everyone's lives, but happening maybe without us somehow. And for me, this was kind of like an interesting way of saying it, because what the social solidarity economy brings to the table is that it's made of people, and there are cultural values influencing on this. It's not only input, output. The economy is also somehow, can also be transformed from the bottom up and from the inside somehow, if it makes sense. So this is a notion that is very interesting, and that could also help with the CE, because it also brings, when you see the economy as a social process, you can also address issues of gender equality. You can also address issues of social inclusion and employment in this decent employment way, and territorial equality, and so on. And also the SSE also help understand a little bit better the role of citizens to expand beyond the consumer role or the producer, which is also a little bit narrow in my opinion, but this is just my personal opinion, not reflected on the chapter. But it also expands to include the bottom-up initiatives and citizens as political actors, and allows for civic experimentation. This is also somehow a little bit related to seeing the economy as a social process, because you can also see the political nature of economy. And this is something that SSE does quite well, I would say. It could also help promote social inclusion. So one example is the access to decent jobs that we've seen in the Madrid strategy, that it's a very important part of their strategy. And when it comes to innovation, what we've seen in here is that art and cultural actors, they were mobilizing a lot of this innovation, both in entrepreneurship, business models, and on how things were being organized in the area. Currently, these activities, they are threatened to be temporary, which is very sad. Also because of the developmental developmental nature of the neighborhood. So they could risk being temporary, but they also show how art and cultural actors, they can mobilize innovation. And finally, but not finally, because this is not the last item, the role of cultural goods was also something interesting that appeared in this research that came from this strategy in Montevideo, that there was huge promotion of the cultural meaningfulness of buildings, of areas and practices. So in that sense, the goods that would circulate in an economy, they wouldn't just be energy and matter. They wouldn't just be input, output of physical things, but also the cultural values, and would also mean that if we have a building that we value so much, this building should be reused, or this value should be seen beyond the kind of like concrete and beyond the waste part of it. And I think that this is very interesting addition. I know that there are not everyone here is based in Finland or knows Finland, but it's definitely something that I noticed living here, that buildings here get demolished so quickly. And I keep thinking about all the kind of, if there wasn't any kind of like collective love for these buildings, or if people didn't have any kind of like attachment to it beyond being just a building. So this is definitely an interesting finding from our research, and of course that it's connected to seeing the economy as a social process. SSE also brings a lot of value in terms of alternative business models. So this means cooperative-based business models and social entrepreneurship. This means the shared ownership of the businesses, and something that I hadn't questioned before, which is who has the right to vote and who has the right to influence in the decision making. Can the decision making in a business be also flat and horizontal? So these are things that SSE could bring to circular economy models as well. When it comes to education, there was also present in these strategies some ideas of including the principles of SSE in the school curriculum. And of course, school curriculums, everyone wants to put everything in school curriculums. Everyone aims to influence what's happening in the children's minds and youth mind with what we think it's important. But this was also something that appeared as a possibility. And finally, SSE could help also increase the awareness and preparedness of risks. And of course, it could be more because our study was very exploratory. And it doesn't mean that every circular economy initiative should have all of this, should include all of these aspects of social solidarity economy. But this is just an idea of the values that this could bring. And right now, it seems that the title of this presentation was very random and not related at all. So, can cities overcome capitalism? So basically, the idea of this title was to understand, having all of these things considered, when we unite social solidarity economy to circular economy, can we develop the cities in a way that is not capitalistic, or could SSE bring to circular economy this kind of like radicalism to change and challenge the economic system a little bit more? Or does it happen that when we unite both, we actually water down the radicalism of social solidarity economy and we make it a little bit numb? So not really tackling all of these issues and not really transforming the economic system, or not changing, but actually making a little bit more bearable and a little bit less problematic. So what would be the case? I don't know. These are just questions that we have now for the presentation. So questions for all of you to think a little bit. And when this social solidarity economy and circular economy, they are put together, what type of competing normativities do we see emerging? So because of course they come from distinct ways of seeing the world, and they come from distinct places of the world. So while circular economy is very strong in Europe and China, social solidarity economy is strong in Latin America for a reason. And the reasons are that we have different histories, we have different contexts, and we have different needs, and we have different ways that we organize our modern economies. Because if we see the economies as a social process, and if we see influenced by the culture, capitalism is not the same everywhere. So these are also questions that we could see emerging. We also need to question how we evaluate and how we measure the performance when they are together. Because if we have different ways of valuing what we consider it's important, how can we come up with indicators and how we can come up and say, hey, now this has been a successful circular and social solidarity economy policy? How do we evaluate that when they have very different goals? If one of them is very anti-capitalist, do we say it's successful when capitalism has ended? And how do we evaluate that? And if it's in the very city level, this is even more tricky because there are interdependencies. And if we don't want to, if we water down this anti-capitalist type of ideology of SSE, how do we evaluate the rest? So it's a lot of questions. And we also understood that more studies that focus on the cultural and social aspects of both CE and social solidarity economy are needed. And that's when it comes the great part about science, is that no one needs to do anything by themselves. So in the same book, there are many of these questions they are already addressed. So for example, one of the chapters is about how indigenous cultures and knowledge already includes elements of circularity. And it's very, very interesting. And there are many others. So I think that exactly this focus of cultural and social aspects of both CE and SSE are exactly what it's been done on this book. So I would say that I'm very happy that we see this gap being addressed that we notice in this book chapter. But that's it. Thank you, everyone, for being here on Zoom. It's not easy. And we have here the link to our research group where you can see more research being done on the same topic of circular economy. And you have all of our emails and you can reach out to us.